Mom, you don't understand. You'll ruin me. My son, Mark, was sweating, his face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights of the bank. His wife, Chloe, just stared, her mouth open. They had dragged me here, to this cold office, expecting me to sign away my home, my last bit of security as collateral for their reckless spending. They saw me as a simple, quiet old woman. Chloe had even called my house my only real asset. "I won't be co-signing this loan," I said, my voice clear and steady. "But you have to." I looked him right in the eye. "No, Mark, I'm not co-signing the loan. I'm buying the debt. My holding company purchased your bad debt portfolio this morning. I am your make-or-break investor, and I'm calling the loan." But that explosion was just the final crack in a foundation that had been crumbling for years. To understand how we reached that breaking point, we need to go back to the beginning. The beginning wasn't an explosion. It was a text message. Just a few blue words on a screen from my son, Mark. "Mom, Chloe and I have a last-minute gala. Need you to watch Leo. 5 p.m. Not can you. Just need you." I drove over an hour from my little bungalow to their new neighborhood. New is an understatement. It was a different world. The houses weren't just houses, they were statements. All glass and sharp angles, with lawns that looked like they were cut with scissors. I parked my 10-year-old sedan on the street. The gleaming, empty driveway was clearly not for me, and smoothed down my sensible wool coat. I felt like a sparrow landing in a flock of swans. Before I could even ring the bell, the heavy, dark wood door swung open. There was my daughter-in-law, Chloe. She was perfect. Not a blonde hair out of place, wearing a cream-colored cashmere outfit that probably cost more than my car payment. She looked like she'd just stepped out of a magazine, and she was already holding my grandson, Leo, on her hip. "Elaine, thanks for coming," she said, her voice bright but thin, like ice. "We're already running late." "Of course, dear. How's my favorite boy?" I reached for Leo, but Chloe turned slightly. "He's just about to have his evening meal," she said, nodding toward the kitchen. And that's when she hit me with it. The line that set everything in motion. "We'll be back late," she said, adjusting a strap on her heel. "Leo's pre-made organic meal is in the fridge. Just microwave the container. And please." She looked up, and her eyes swept over me. "Try not to touch anything in the new kitchen. Mark had it imported from Italy, and the surfaces scratch if you look at them wrong." She said it so casually, like she was telling me the weather. Try not to touch anything. Me, the woman who had scrubbed Mark's scraped knees, changed his diapers, and baked thousands of cookies in a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon. I was now a potential hazard, a walking, talking liability. I must have just stood there, stunned, because she sighed, a little puff of impatience. "Mark's in the car. The list is on the counter." She handed me Leo, who felt stiff in my arms, and then she was gone. The door clicked shut, the silence of the house slamming down on me. The house was a masterpiece. It was also as cold as a tomb. I stood in the entryway listening. Nothing. No tick-tock of a clock, no hum of a furnace, just the faint, chemical smell of an expensive cleaning product. Every surface was white, or gray, or glass. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a showroom. It looked like Chloe. I carried Leo into the kitchen. It was enormous. An island the size of my first apartment, all gleaming white stone. And there, in the exact center of that vast, empty space, was the list. It wasn't just a list. It was a 2-page, double-sided, laminated document. I put Leo down in his playpen, a gray, minimalist rectangle with no colorful toys, just wooden blocks, and I picked it up. The plastic was still warm from the laminator. "Leo's evening schedule. Please follow exactly. 5:15 p.m. Administer meal. Organic kale, quinoa blend. Container #3. Microwave for 22 seconds only. Test on inner wrist. Use blue silicone spoon. The orange spoon is for sweet potato. Do not mix. It can cause taste confusion. 5:45 p.m. Playtime. Floor mat only. Wipe down mat with provided alcohol-free solution before and after use. 6 p.m. Screen time. 20 minutes of Baby Einstein. Bach. No exceptions. This is vital for his neural pathway development. 6:20 p.m. Bath. Use lavender-infused pH-balanced wash, pre-measured and pump. Water temperature must be 98.6 degrees. Use digital thermometer. 6:45 p.m. Story time. 1. One book from the approved stack. No character voices. It overstimulates him. 7 p.m. Bedtime. Place in crib on his back. Do not rock him. He is sleep-trained. I had to read that last one twice. Do not rock him. I ran my thumb over the sharp, laminated edge. My hand, wrinkled and spotted from years of pulling weeds in my garden, looked wrong in this perfect, sterile space. I felt a slow, cold anger building in my chest. This wasn't a set of instructions. It was a manual for an appliance. I wasn't a grandmother. I was an unpaid, untrusted employee. I looked over at Leo. He was just sitting in his playpen, not making a sound. He was just watching me. His eyes were wide and quiet. He wasn't crying. He wasn't gurgling. He wasn't being a baby. He was just existing. My Mark, at that age, was a tiny hurricane. He'd be rattling the bars, covered in mashed banana, giggling his head off. My gaze drifted to the mantelpiece over the cold, black fireplace. It was the only place with any personality. There was a single, silver-framed photo. It was Mark, about 20 years old, beaming. He was wearing a faded college sweatshirt, his hair was a mess, and he had his arms slung around me. We were standing in the backyard of my old house, the one on Maple Street. The one with the peeling paint and the rose bushes I loved. I remembered that day. It was the day I told him I'd figured out a way to pay for his MBA program. He'd been accepted to his dream school, a place so prestigious and expensive it might as well have been on the moon. He'd been so worried, so sure it was impossible. "It's just a house, honey," I'd told him, tucking his acceptance letter into his pocket. "Your future is what matters." A month later, I sold that house, the one I'd brought him home from the hospital in, the one where I thought I'd live out the rest of my days. I sold it, gave him the money, and moved into my little bungalow. I never regretted it. Not for a second. Until now. I looked at the photo of that bright-eyed, grateful boy, and then at the laminated list in my hand, and I wondered where he had gone. The man who lived in this cold, gray house, the man who let his wife tell his own mother, "Try not to touch anything," was a stranger to me. I sighed. A long, quiet breath that was lost in the high-ceilinged room. I put the list down on the counter, the plastic making a sharp clack on the stone. It was the only sound in the whole, silent house. That clack of the plastic on the stone seemed to echo in the silence. It was the only sound in the whole, silent house. I looked at the laminated list, then at my grandson. He was still just watching me, not a peep. My Mark, at that age, would have been rattling the bars of his playpen, demanding to be picked up, probably with a face already smeared with something. I walked over to the gray, minimalist pen and knelt. "Well, hello there, Leo," I whispered. His big brown eyes, Mark's eyes, just stared, as if he was trying to figure out what I was. I reached in, my hands wrinkled and dotted with age spots from decades of gardening, and I scooped him up. He was light, and he smelled faintly of that expensive lavender soap, but he was stiff. He was actually stiff in my arms, almost bracing himself. "It's okay, sweetie. Grandma's got you." I glanced at the list again, still sitting there on that vast, empty island of stone. Rule #7. Do not rock him. He is sleep-trained. I immediately walked over to one of the hard, angular dining room chairs, sat down, and began to rock. Slowly, at first. Leo's little body was rigid. He didn't know how to be held like this. He didn't know how to just melt. His little arms were straight at his sides. "Oh, you poor thing," I murmured into his soft, fine hair. "This isn't how it's supposed to be, is it? This perfect house, this perfect schedule." It was like a little prison for him, too. I started to hum. It was an old, tuneless melody, the same one I'd hummed to Mark when he had a fever, the same one I'd hummed while I rolled out pie crusts in a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon and apples. That tune, it took me right back to a different kitchen, in a different house. The house on Maple Street, the one with the squeaky screen door and the worn linoleum floors I'd scrubbed on my hands and knees for 20 years. The one where I had a chipped porcelain mug that I drank my coffee from every single morning. I looked out the giant plate glass window of Mark's cold, silent museum, but I didn't see the perfectly manicured lawn. I saw my yard, I saw my climbing roses, the ones that had finally made it all the way over the trellis by the porch, a riot of red and pink. I saw the big oak tree with the tire swing that my late husband had hung for Mark. I saw the patch of dirt by the back steps that I'd given up on, the one Mark had turned into a construction site for his toy trucks. The memory was so clear, it was almost painful. Mark had come running in from his part-time job at the college mailroom, waving a thick, cream-colored envelope. The MBA program, the one that was a stepping stone to Wall Street, to a different life, to a world I only read about. "I got in, Mom, I actually got in." We danced around that little kitchen, me with flour on my apron, him in his worn-out sneakers. And then he opened the tuition packet. The joy just evaporated. It vanished. I watched my son, my brilliant, hard-working boy, just deflate before my eyes. The cost wasn't just a number. It was a wall. It was astronomical. It was more than the house was worth, more than I'd ever seen. "It's okay, Mark," he'd said, but his voice was dead. It was a long shot anyway. I'll find a different job. He went to throw the packet in the trash, right next to the potato peels. I grabbed his wrist. My hand was covered in flour. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice low. "You earned this. We'll figure it out." That night, I sat at my old Formica kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, a calculator, and a pile of bills. There was no we. There was just me. The second mortgage was already paying for his undergrad degree. I had nothing left in savings. I looked around that kitchen, at the crayon marks on the wall from 1998 that we'd never painted over, at the dent in the refrigerator from when Mark tried to ride his bike inside, and I realized I did have one thing left. The next morning I called a realtor. I will never forget the sound of the hammer pounding that for sale sign into my front lawn. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Each blow felt like it was hitting my own chest. Mark stood on the porch, his face ashen. "Mom, no, you can't. This is our home. This is where I grew up." I walked up the steps, ignoring the pit in my stomach, and I brushed his hair back from his eyes. He was so young, so full of potential. "It's just a house, honey," I told him, forcing a smile. "It's just wood and nails. Your future. That's what matters. This house. It's just an investment. And you are a much, much better investment." We had a garage sale. I watched strangers pick over my life, haggling over my wedding china, my husband's old vinyl records. Chloe, who Mark had just started dating, had come by. She was wearing designer jeans even back then. I remember her picking up one of my grandmother's hand-painted teacups and saying to Mark, "Who even buys this old junk? It's so sentimental." I sold the house on Maple Street. I left my roses. I packed up 25 years of memories into 10 cardboard boxes, gave Mark a cashier's check for the entire amount, and moved into the little 2-bedroom bungalow on the other side of town. And I never looked back. I came back to myself in that cold, gray dining room. Leo had finally fallen asleep in my arms. His little body had gone limp, his head tucked right under my chin, his tiny hand curled around my finger. I had broken Rule #7, he was sleep-trained, and I had untrained him. I looked at this precious, sleeping child, this grandson I was barely allowed to be a grandmother to. I thought of the house I sold, the roses I left behind, the life I'd given up so my son could have this palace, this life where his own mother was treated like a clumsy, incompetent stranger who couldn't be trusted around an Italian countertop. "Try not to touch anything." The words echoed in my head, but now they had a new, bitter sting. I had given him everything. I had given him the very foundation his entire shiny life was built on. And in return, he and his wife were worried I'd scratch something. A slow, quiet anger, colder and harder than their countertops, began to settle in my heart. It wasn't about the house. It wasn't even about the money. It was about the respect. It was about me. And I realized, holding my sleeping grandson, that I had been letting them not touch me for far, far too long. I held my sleeping grandson for a long, long time, just breathing in that new baby smell, letting the warmth of his little body seep into me. I had broken Rule #7, do not rock him, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. Finally, I carried him into his perfectly sterile nursery and gently laid him in his crib. He sighed in his sleep, his little fist curling by his cheek. I couldn't help it. I stroked his hair, my unapproved touch lingering. This, I thought, this is what a grandmother is for. I walked back out into the living room, my footsteps silent on the expensive rugs. And just as I was wondering what to do with myself for the next few hours, the front door burst open, and a gust of cold night air swept in. Chloe entered first, a blur of movement. She didn't even look at me. She went straight to her phone, which was on a charging pad on the hall table, tapping the screen. I'm sure she was checking the nursery cam, checking to see if I'd followed the rules. She disappeared down the hall to the nursery, her heels clicking an angry rhythm on the hardwood. Mark followed, loosening his tie, his own phone already pressed to his ear. "No," I told them, "the projections are solid," he was saying, his voice sharp. "Just move the assets. I don't care what it takes, just—" He saw me, held up a finger, "Hold on," and then covered the receiver. "Hey, Mom, how'd it go? Everything good?" "You follow the list." His eyes weren't on me. They were on his watch. He was already somewhere else, in a boardroom, in a meeting, in a world of numbers that had nothing to do with the little boy sleeping down the hall. "He was a joy, Mark," I said, my voice sounding small in the vast, high-ceilinged room. "I was just sitting here thinking, this neighborhood has changed so much since we—" "Oh, hey," he said, cutting me off completely. He clearly hadn't heard a word. I almost forgot. He pulled his phone away from his ear, fumbled in his jacket pocket, and pulled out his wallet. It was a sleek, black leather thing that probably cost a fortune. He opened it and, without even really looking, pulled out a crisp, new $100 bill. He held it out to me. "For your trouble," he said, his eyes already drifting back to his phone screen. I just stared at it. At the bill. At Benjamin Franklin's face, looking up at me almost sympathetically. "For your trouble." Like I was the pizza delivery guy. Like I was the valet who'd parked his car. My hand didn't move. I couldn't make it move. My mind flashed back to that bank, all those years ago. To the cashier's check I'd handed him. A check with so many zeros on it, it barely looked real. The check that represented my home, my marriage, my past, my entire life, handed over with a smile so he could have this future. And here he was, handing me $100 bill. "Mom? Take it." He sounded impatient. He jiggled the bill. "For gas? Or whatever." I felt Chloe's eyes on me. She had reappeared from the nursery, standing in the hallway, her arms crossed. Her face was a mask of cold disapproval. I knew, just from her stare, that Leo hadn't been on his back, in the precise center of the crib. I slowly reached out and took the money. The paper felt thin and insulting in my palm. "Go on," Mark said, turning away, his attention already back on his call. "Go buy something nice for what is it? Your garden? Some new flowers or something." And that was it. That was the line. What is it? Your garden? My garden wasn't just a hobby. It wasn't some flowers. My garden was my life. After I sold the house, I took the tiny bit of money I'd kept for myself, and I started a business. A small specialty nursery. I grew heirloom roses, the old-fashioned, fragrant, fussy kind that Chloe would probably find messy. I'd built it from nothing, from dirt and cuttings and sweat. It was my passion. It was my pride. It was my income. I'd spent the last 15 years building a reputation, and I had clients all over the state. And my own son, the man whose entire career was built on investments, had never once asked about mine. He didn't just forget. He had never, ever known. He saw my life's work as a little hobby, something I could buy some new flowers for with the tip he'd just given me. I closed my hand, the bill crinkling inside my fist. "Thank you, Mark," I said. My voice was perfectly level, perfectly calm. It didn't shake. It didn't waver. "It's getting late. I should go." "Yep, great. See you at Thanksgiving, Mom. Drive safe." He was already walking up the glass and steel staircase, his voice dropping back into that sharp business tone. "Right. I'm back. Now, about that quarterly report." I walked out the heavy front door, pulling my old wool coat tight. I didn't look back at Chloe. I got into my sedan, the engine turning over with a familiar, comforting rumble. I sat there for a full minute, parked on the street outside their perfect, silent house. I opened my hand and looked at the $100 bill. It was a wall. It was a verdict. It was the price he'd put on me. I put the bill in my glove compartment, separate from my own wallet. And as I drove away from that cold, dark street, I felt that slow, cold anger finally settle into something else. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity, a kind of hard, cold, perfect clarity. I finally saw it. I finally understood. My son didn't just not see me, he had erased me, and I realized, with a sudden, shocking certainty, that I was done. I was done being a ghost in his perfect, shiny life. I was done being a ghost in his perfect, shiny life. I turned the key, and the familiar, healthy rumble of my old engine felt like a comfort. I pulled away from the curb, my headlights sweeping across the perfectly manicured lawn, and I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I knew exactly what I'd see. A big, cold, dark house that didn't have a single light on. The drive home was long. It always was. It took me out of their world of silent, winding roads, past the guarded gates, away from the identical, professionally landscaped front yards. It took me back over the highway, back to the part of the city where the houses had character because they were old, where the streetlights were a little dimmer and the trees were a lot bigger. I drove in silence. The radio was off. The only sound was the hum of the tires on the asphalt. My hands were steady on the wheel. That cold, hard clarity was still there. It wasn't anger anymore, not the hot kind. It was something different. It was a kind of finality. My mind kept going back to that $100 bill, sitting in my glove compartment. It felt less like a piece of paper and more like a splinter, lodged somewhere deep. For your trouble. A tip. The kind you give someone you'll never see again. Someone whose name you don't even know. I thought about the math of it. I'd sold my home, my life, for his future. That single cashier's check had been my everything. It was the seed from which his entire forest of success had grown. And in return, he'd handed me a single leaf. He'd reduced our entire history, all that sacrifice, all that love, to a $100 transaction. He hadn't just insulted me. He had quantified me. He had put a price tag on Mom, and it was $100. For your... what is it? Your garden? I smiled. A thin, tight smile that was just for me, in the dark of the car. My little hobby, my garden, wasn't just some backyard patch. It was a thriving business I had built from the ground up, from the dirt under my fingernails. My nursery, Rosewood Heirlooms, it was one of the most respected specialty growers in the state. I had clients who flew in on private jets to buy my cuttings. I'd built that with the small nest egg I'd had the good sense to keep for myself. But my real investment? Well, that was something else entirely. When I sold the house on Maple Street, I gave Mark the lion's share, but I wasn't a fool. I'd seen what my late husband's sure-thing investments had dwindled to. So, I took my portion, and I didn't put it in a savings account. I put it with a quiet, brilliant young man my husband had once dismissed as a bookworm, a man who saw, even back in the 90 seconds, that the future wasn't in strip malls, it was in computer chips. Mark thought I was just Mom. He thought I was a simple, frugal woman living in a small bungalow, pinching pennies, content to grow flowers. He had never, not once, asked me about my own finances. He just assumed. He assumed I was, like him, just less. I finally pulled into my own driveway. I cut the engine and just sat for a moment. Home. I could smell the damp earth and the faint, spicy scent of my prized Crimson Glory roses. I got out, and the gravel crunched under my sensible shoes. It was the best sound in the world. Inside, my house was warm. It was cluttered. Books on horticulture were piled on the coffee table. Muddy boots were by the door. It smelled like potting soil and old books. It was alive. I walked past the kitchen. I wasn't going to microwave anything in 22 seconds. I went to my little office, a corner of the living room I'd converted. It wasn't sleek. It was an old oak desk, but on it sat a high-end, powerful computer, 3 stacked monitors, and a shelf of financial journals. This was my real garden. I sat down, my chair giving a familiar, comforting squeak. I turned on the desk lamp. Then, I went back out to the car, opened the glove compartment, and took out the $100 bill. I brought it back inside and smoothed it on the desk, right next to my keyboard, Exhibit A. I picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. "David? It's Elaine." My voice was different. The soft, grandmotherly tone was gone. This was the voice of Elaine, CEO of Rosewood Heirlooms and a silent partner in David's investment firm. "I'm fine, thank you," I said, cutting past the small talk. "I'm just calling to check on the main portfolio. How are we looking?" I listened, my eyes scanning the desk. I picked up a pen and jotted a number on a legal pad. It was a very, very long number, a number that made Mark's Italian Kitchen look like a rounding error. "Excellent," I said. "And the tech fund we rebalanced last quarter? The one you were so worried about?" I listened again, a small smile playing on my lips. Good. No. Don't liquidate a thing. Let's wait for the quarterly report. I have a feeling the market's about to shift, and I want to be ready. I paused, my fingers tapping on the $100 bill. "Actually, David, there is one more thing, a new opportunity. I want you to look into a small, private commercial loan. It's likely a distressed asset, probably about to default. The debtor is a Markham Enterprises." I spelled it out for him. Markham. Yes, just like my son's. I need the full financials on them. I want to know who holds their debt, how over-leveraged they are, and what their default provisions look like. I need it as soon as you can get it. Quietly, of course. I listened for a final moment. "Thank you, David. You've always been a great help. I'll talk to you soon." I hung up the phone. The house was perfectly quiet, but this silence was different from the one at Mark's. This was my silence. It was the silence of control. I looked at the $100 bill. It was just a piece of paper, but it was also a declaration of war. Or, at least, a long overdue education. "Okay, Mark," I whispered to the empty room. "You want to talk about assets? You want to talk about business?" I folded the bill and tucked it into a drawer under a stack of seed catalogs. "Let's talk business. Let's talk business." And just like that, the business came to me. It didn't take long. David, my financial advisor, was nothing if not thorough. It took him less than a week to send a full encrypted report to my secure email. I read it in my little office, surrounded by the smell of potting soil and old books, and the contents were breathtaking. Markham Enterprises wasn't just in trouble, it was a house of cards in a hurricane. My son, my brilliant MBA-educated son, had done exactly what I'd always feared. He had mistaken wealth for intelligence. He'd taken his high-salary, safe job and leveraged it to the hilt, pouring millions of borrowed dollars into a flashy new commercial development. He'd signed personal guarantees. He was, in David's simple, brutal terms, catastrophically overextended. The whole thing was about to collapse, and it would take his Italian kitchen, his gray-on-gray house, and everything else right down with it. The primary debt holder, a private equity firm, was about to foreclose. I was outside, pruning my peace roses, my hands deep in the good, rich earth, when my phone rang. I saw Mark's name on the screen, and I almost smiled. I wiped the dirt on my jeans and answered, "Hello, Mark." Mom, thank God." His voice was high, cracking at the edges. The calm, dismissive CEO who'd handed me $100 was gone. This was the little boy who'd broken a window and was afraid to confess. "Mom, I'm in a bind. A real bind." He talked for 10 solid minutes, the words just spilling out of him. Over-leveraged, bad partners. The anchor tenant pulled out. "It's just a temporary cash flow problem, I swear." It was a blizzard of excuses, a tornado of financial jargon that all meant one thing: he was failing. Then came the real reason for the call. "Look, a critical loan just fell through, but I've got one last shot. A new investor. We're having dinner at the club tonight, Mom. It's make or break. But I have to show good faith. I have to secure a temporary bridge loan, just to tide things over." "A bridge loan?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm. "Yes, exactly. It's just a formality. It's just paperwork. But my accounts are frozen. The bank. They're being difficult." He took a shaky breath. I need a co-signer." "A co-signer," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "Yes, and your credit is perfect, right? You always paid everything on time. It's just for a few weeks, Mom, I swear. As soon as I close this new guy, I'll pay it right off. You won't even notice." His voice was desperate now, pleading. "But if I don't get it, Mom, if I walk into that dinner at the country club tonight empty-handed, I'm ruined, Chloe and I, We'll lose everything. Everything you built on my first house, I thought. Where do I need to be? I asked. The bank. My branch. Downtown. Can you be there in an hour? I have the papers all drawn up. Thank you, Mom. Thank you. You're a lifesaver. You've always been my lifesaver. He hung up. I looked at the phone in my dirt-covered hand. My lifesaver. Funny, he'd never called me that when he was handing me a tip. I went inside, and I washed my hands very, very thoroughly. I scrubbed every last bit of dirt from under my nails, put on my nicest blouse, and found the keys to my car. The bank was all marble and hushed tones. It felt like a funeral home. Mark was waiting by the door, and he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His hair was a mess, his expensive suit was rumpled, and he was visibly vibrating with stress. When he saw me, he practically ran over and grabbed my arm. Mom, thank you, we're all set. Chloe was there too. She was sitting in a hard-backed chair against the far wall, her knuckles white as she gripped her $1,000 handbag. Her perfect, icy mask was cracked. She looked terrified, and she looked furious. She gave me a single, desperate nod. Mr. Henderson will see you now, a young woman said. We were led into a glass-walled office. Mr. Henderson, the loan officer, looked pale and uncomfortable. He stood up to shake my hand. Mrs. Miller, he said, please, sit. Let's just get this done, Mom, Mark said, his leg bouncing so hard it shook the table. Of course, Mr. Henderson said, adjusting his tie. He clearly wanted this to be over. But I do need to go over the terms. This is a significant note. It's a high-interest, short-term loan, and it is, well, it's unsecured on Mr. Markham's side, which is why we require collateral from the co-signer. Collateral? I asked, looking right at Mark. His eyes darted away. It's just paperwork, Mom. Yes, the banker said, sliding a thick stack of papers across the desk toward me. The loan is for $200,000. The terms state that you, as co-signer, will pledge your primary residence as collateral. In the event of a default, which won't happen, Mark burst out, his voice too loud for the quiet room. It's not going to default, it's just for a week. The dinner is tonight. This is just to get me to the dinner. I just stared at the papers. My bungalow. My little house, the one I'd bought with what was left over, the one I'd filled with my roses and my books, the one that was mine. They weren't just asking for my signature, they were asking for my home. My mind flashed, sharp as a camera, to that for sale sign being hammered into the lawn of my old life. The first time, I had offered my house. I had given it freely, with a mother's love. This time, they were here to take it. Mark, I said, my voice quiet. You're asking me to bet my house on your failed business, the business you built with the money from my last house. It's not like that, he stammered, his face turning a blotchy red. It's just, and that's when Chloe snapped. The fear and rage finally boiled over. Oh, just sign it, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. She stood up, her chair scraping horribly on the floor. Look, can we just get this over with? We get it. You're nervous. She turned to Mark, then back to me, her eyes drilling into me. We know her house is her only real asset. It's not much, but the bank said it's just enough for the collateral. Just sign the papers, Elaine, so we can fix this. Don't you see what we're about to lose? Her only real asset. The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy as glass. My house. My not much house. The final, insulting, desperate dismissal. Mark looked at the floor, ashamed, but saying nothing to defend me. Chloe was breathing hard, her face flushed with ugly entitlement. The banker was suddenly very, very busy, shuffling his papers, his eyes fixed on his desk. They all waited. They all looked at me, the simple, frugal old woman who grew flowers, the woman they had pushed into a corner, the woman with no other assets. They waited for me to do what I had always done. They waited for me to save them. He hung up before I could say another word. You're a lifesaver, his voice echoed in my quiet kitchen. My lifesaver. Funny, he'd never called me that when he was handing me a tip. I went inside and washed my hands very, very thoroughly. I scrubbed every last bit of dirt from under my nails, put on my nicest blouse, the cream-colored silk one, and found the keys to my car. I was going to the bank. The branch downtown was all marble and hushed tones. It felt like a funeral home, and I suppose, in a way, it was. Mark was waiting by the door, and he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His hair was a mess, his expensive suit was rumpled, and he was visibly vibrating with stress. When he saw me, he practically ran over and grabbed my arm, his grip too tight. "Mom, thank you, we're all set. Henderson is waiting." Chloe was there too. She was sitting in a hard-backed chair against the far wall, her knuckles white as she gripped her $1,000 handbag. Her perfect, icy mask was cracked. She looked terrified, and she looked furious. She gave me a single, desperate nod as Mark practically dragged me toward a glass-walled office. "Mr. Henderson will see you now," a young woman said, not meeting our eyes. Mr. Henderson, the loan officer, looked pale and uncomfortable. He stood up to shake my hand. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his own hand a little damp. "Please, sit." "Let's just get this done, Mom," Mark said, his leg bouncing so hard it shook the table. He couldn't sit still. "It's all standard, just like I said. A formality." "Of course," Mr. Henderson said, adjusting his tie. He clearly wanted this to be over. "But I do need to go over the terms for the record. This is a significant note. It's a high-interest, short-term loan for $200,000. He slid a thick stack of papers across the desk toward me, tapping one of the signature pages. "The loan is, well, it's unsecured on Mr. Markham's side, which is why the bank requires full collateral from the co-signer." "Collateral?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm. I looked right at Mark. His eyes darted away, finding a suddenly fascinating spot on the carpet. "It's just paperwork, Mom. It's just a temporary." "Yes," the banker interrupted, his voice strained. He was a man doing a job he hated. "The terms state that you, as co-signer, will pledge your primary residence as collateral. In the event of a default, which won't happen," Mark burst out, his voice too loud for the quiet room. "It's not going to default. It's just for a week. The dinner is tonight. This is just to get me to the dinner." I didn't hear him. I was staring at the papers, at the legal description of my bungalow, my little house, the one I'd bought with what was left over, the one I'd filled with my roses and my books, the one that was mine. They weren't just asking for my signature. They were asking for my home. My mind flashed, sharp as a camera, to that for sale sign being hammered into the lawn of my old life, the one on Maple Street. The first time I had offered my house, I had walked clear-eyed into that decision. I had given it freely, with a mother's love. This time, they were here to take it. "Mark," I said, my voice quiet, cutting through his panicked justifications. "You're asking me to bet my house on your failed business, the business you built with the money from my last house." It's not like that," he stammered, his face turning a blotchy red. It's just. And that's when Chloe snapped. The fear and rage finally boiled over. "Oh, just sign it," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. She stood up, her chair scraping horribly on the polished floor. "Look, can we just get this over with? We get it." "You're nervous." She turned to Mark, then back to me, her eyes drilling into me with a raw, ugly entitlement. "We know her house is her only real asset." The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy as glass. "It's not much," she continued, her voice dripping with contempt, "but the bank said it's just enough for the collateral. Just sign the papers, Elaine, so we can fix this. Don't you see what we're about to lose? Her only real asset, my house, my not much house. The final, insulting, desperate dismissal." Mark looked at the floor, ashamed, but saying nothing to defend me. Chloe was breathing hard, her face flushed. The banker was suddenly very, very busy, shuffling his own papers, his eyes fixed on his desk. They all waited. They all looked at me, the simple, frugal old woman who grew flowers, the woman they had pushed into a corner, the woman with no other assets. They waited for me to do what I had always done. They waited for me to save them. I let the silence sit there for a second. I let Chloe's ugly, panicked words hang in the air, echoing in the quiet, expensive room. Her only real asset. I looked at my son, who was still refusing to meet my eyes, staring at the pen by the signature line. I looked at the banker, Mr. Henderson, who was visibly sweating, and then I looked at the stack of papers that represented my home. With one hand, I pushed the stack, very slowly, back across the polished desk. It made a soft, shushing sound. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. Mark's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. What? Mom, what are you talking about? You have to. Chloe scoffed, a short, sharp sound of pure contempt. What do you mean, no? Elaine, we don't have time for this. Just sign it. Don't be dramatic. I said no. I repeated, just as calmly. I will not be co-signing this loan. Mom, you don't understand. Mark's voice cracked, and he lunged forward, his hands flat on the desk, his knuckles white. You'll ruin me. That dinner at the club is in 3 hours. If I don't get this, I'm done. Everything is gone. Yes, I said. I understand that. You'll lose the house with the Italian kitchen. You'll lose the fancy cars. You'll lose, well, everything that I bought you. Mark recoiled as if I'd slapped him. What does that have to do with anything? This is about now. Mark, I said, and my voice was so cold and so steady, it stopped him. You told me you were in a bind. You said a critical loan fell through, and you needed this bridge loan to impress a new, make-or-break investor. Is that correct? Yes. That's what I've been trying to tell you, he said, grasping at the straw. Well, I said, leaning forward slightly. There's a problem with that. This loan, the one for $200,000, it's not going to get you to that dinner. In fact, this whole application, it's irrelevant. What are you talking about? Chloe hissed. The banker is right here. Stop playing games. I turned my full attention to the banker, who looked like he wanted to crawl under his desk. Mr. Henderson, you work for Northern Allied Bank, correct? And until this morning, Northern Allied held the primary unsecured debt for Markham Enterprises. Mr. Henderson looked completely confused. Well, yes, but not anymore. That's part of the problem for Mr. Markham. The note it was acquired, sold off just this morning to a third-party private equity firm. That's who's foreclosing. We don't hold the debt any longer. Mark's face went white. It was a terrible, waxy color. Sold? What? This morning? They can't do that. Oh, they can, Mark, I said, my voice soft. It's called business. It's what you do. The firm that held your debt decided you were too big of a risk. So, they sold your bad paper, my son's bad debt, to the highest bidder. So I'm ruined, Mark whispered. He collapsed back into his chair, his hands shaking so badly he had to hide them in his lap. That's it. It's over. That new investor. They must have bought the debt. They're the ones foreclosing on me before I even get to the dinner. Yes, they are, I said. I reached into my purse, the one I'd bought at a garage sale 10 years ago. I pulled out a simple, cream-colored business card. I slid it across the desk, right past the useless loan papers, and stopped it directly in front of him. He stared at it, uncomprehending. Chloe leaned over, her eyes squinting to read it. Rosewood Investments, she read aloud, her voice trembling. What? What is this? Some gardening company. That's my little hobby, Chloe, I said. The garden Mark gave me $100 for. Mark looked at the card, then up at me. His mind was finally, agonizingly, putting the pieces together. The blood drained from his face as he made the connection. You, he whispered. It wasn't even a word. It was just a breath. I looked at my son, the one who thought my only asset was a not-much house. I'm not co-signing the loan, Mark, I said, my voice clear and steady in the silent glass-walled room. I'm buying the debt. I turned to Mr. Henderson, who was now staring at me with a mix of terror and awe. I apologize for the confusion, Mr. Henderson. My son brought me here under false pretenses. This meeting is over. I turned back to Mark. My holding company, Rosewood Investments, purchased your entire bad debt portfolio at 7 o'clock this morning. I am your make-or-break investor. I am the third party who holds the note. I leaned in, and my voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried all the weight of the house I'd sold and all the love he'd thrown away. And I'm calling the loan. You have 30 days. Unless, of course, I decide to restructure. And I'm calling the loan. You have 30 days. Unless, of course, I decide to restructure. The silence in that glass-walled office was absolute. It was heavier and colder than any room in Mark's house. Mr. Henderson, the banker, looked like he'd just seen a ghost. He was frozen, his mouth half open, staring at me as if I'd just grown a second head. Mark, my son. He hadn't moved. He was just staring at me, his face a waxy, pale color, his mind clearly refusing to process what I'd just said. It was Chloe who spoke first. Her voice was a dry, rasping whisper, nothing like the sharp, entitled hiss from before. Rosewood. Investments. She looked down at the simple, cream-colored business card on the desk, as if it were a snake. That's you. She looked up at me, her eyes, for the first time, filled with something other than contempt. It was pure, unadulterated shock. Yes, Chloe, that's me. I smiled, a small, tight smile that didn't reach my eyes. That's my little hobby. The garden Mark gave me $100 for. Mark finally made a sound. A small, choked noise. But how? The house. The bungalow. You grow roses. I almost laughed. It was so pathetic. He was trying to reconcile the woman he thought I was, the simple, frugal woman living in a not-much house, the woman with only one asset, with the person sitting in front of him. He was trying to make it make sense. Yes, I do, I said. I love my roses, and my nursery Rosewood Heirlooms does very, very well. But Rosewood Investments. I tapped the card on the desk, the small sound echoing in the room. That's something different. I let him sit there. I let him struggle. I let him try to understand how the woman he thought was a financial non-entity could hold his entire, high-flying life in the palm of her hand. You remember the house on Maple Street, Mark? The one I sold. He just nodded, dumbly. His eyes were glazed. I gave you the money for your MBA. I gave you your future. I set you on this path. My voice was still quiet, but it was hard as steel. But I wasn't a fool, Mark. I didn't give you all of it. I kept a portion for myself. And I didn't put it in a savings account, letting it rot. I turned my gaze to Chloe, who was watching me, her face pale. It was the 1,990 seconds. Everyone was buying sure things and blue-chip stocks. But I had a feeling. I put it all into a little tech company my financial advisor told me about. A little startup in California that was making colorful computers for artists and schools. Everyone, including your father, thought it was a niche market. A little hobby, you might say. I let that hang in the air. You've probably heard of it. It's called Apple. The color, which had drained from Mark's face, now drained from Chloe's. She physically stumbled back, her hand grabbing the back of her chair to steady herself. Apple. The word hung in the air, a final, unanswerable fact. I did very, very well, I said, my voice flat. I did well enough to start my nursery from scratch. I did well enough to buy my little bungalow with cash. And I did well enough to sit here today, Mark, and own you. I looked at Chloe, at her designer handbag, her perfect cashmere, her diamond earrings. I never felt the need to buy an Italian kitchen. I never felt the need to buy a house that looked like a magazine or a car that cost more than my first home. It's called living below your means. Mark, it's the first lesson you should have learned in that expensive school I sent you to. But you were too busy learning how to leverage assets you didn't even own. Chloe understood first. She was faster than him. She understood money. She wasn't just looking at her mother-in-law anymore. She was looking at the richest poor woman she had ever met. She was looking at the woman she had ordered to try not to touch anything, and realizing that woman could buy and sell her 1,000 times over. Her entire life strategy had been based on marrying up. She had just discovered, in the most brutal way possible, that she had been disrespecting the real money in the family all along. But Mark, his realization was different. It was slower, and deeper, and more terrible. He wasn't just seeing a rich woman, he was seeing his mother. He was seeing the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, not once, but twice. The woman he had treated like an incompetent employee. The woman he'd handed a $100 tip. He wasn't just in debt to a bank. He wasn't just in debt to Rosewood Investments. He was, and had always been, in debt to me. He hadn't just disrespected his banker. He had disrespected his patron. Mom, he whispered. His voice was broken. He finally met my eyes, and I saw the boy from the photo on his mantelpiece. The grateful, bright-eyed boy. He was still in there, but he was buried under so much stuff. Chloe, I said, my voice firm again. She flinched, as if I'd struck her. This meeting is over. Mr. Henderson, I said, turning to the banker, who was still frozen. Thank you for your time. You may go. The banker scrambled out of the room so fast, he almost tripped. He didn't say a word, just pulled his office door shut, leaving us there. It was just the three of us. Chloe was frozen, staring at me. She was calculating. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out the new angle, the new way to play this. But Mark just put his head in his hands. His shoulders, in his expensive, rumpled suit, began to shake. It wasn't loud. It was a silent, terrible, full-body tremor, the complete and total collapse of the man he thought he was. He wasn't a master of the universe anymore. He was just a little boy who had been caught. The complete and total collapse of the man he thought he was. He wasn't a master of the universe anymore. He was just a little boy who had been caught. His choked sobs were the only sound in that glass-walled office. The silence from Chloe was, in its own way, just as loud. I could see her mind working, the gears turning frantically. She wasn't seeing a broken husband. She was seeing a new power structure. She was recalculating her entire life, her eyes darting from me to Mark and back to me. Her frozen shock was thawing into a new, oily kind of appraisal. She was looking at me the way she must have looked at Mark when she first saw his MBA and his ambition. She was the first to move. She took a step toward me, her hand slightly outstretched, a terrible, false smile starting to form on her lips. Elaine, I had no idea. We should have dinner. We should really. I held up one hand, a simple, quiet gesture, and she stopped. You had no idea, Chloe? I asked, my voice soft. No, you didn't. You didn't want to have any idea. You never looked hard enough to see anything but a clumsy old woman who might scratch your countertops. You don't get to have dinner with me now. I turned my back on her, dismissing her completely, and focused on my son. He had finally lifted his head. His face was a mess. It was red, tear-streaked, and full of a shame so profound it was almost hard to look at. The arrogance was gone. The confidence. The dismissiveness. It had all been sand-blasted away, leaving just the raw, terrified truth of him. Why? He whispered. His voice was hoarse. Why? Why did you let me? Why did you let me treat you like that? All this time? The $100. The hobby. Why didn't you say something? I sighed. It was a long, slow breath. I had waited years for this question. I was waiting for you to see me, Mark. Not my wallet. Not the woman who wrote your tuition check. Not the babysitter. Just me, your mother. I walked over to the glass wall and looked out at the busy bank lobby. People rushing around, all of them chasing what Mark had. I raised a son, I said, my back to him. But I got a status chaser. I got a man who was so busy looking successful that he forgot what success is. I gave you the money from the house on Maple Street. That was a gift, from a mother to a son. It was all the love I had, turned into an opportunity. It was supposed to be a start, Mark, not a blank check. I turned back to him. And then, you came here today, and you were willing to take my new house, the one I built, with my work. The first house was a gift. This one would have been a theft. You sold my house for your future, and then you were willing to take my new one to cover your mistake. He flinched, the word mistake hitting him harder than theft ever could. You see, assets, Mark, I said, walking back to the table. I picked up the business card. You see countertops and cars and portfolios and houses. You don't see people. You looked at me, your own mother, and all you could see was my only real asset, a not much house you could drain to save your own skin. I put the card down. You're a terrible businessman, Mark, because your greatest asset was sitting in your living room, rocking your son, and you handed her a $100 bill and told her not to touch anything. He broke. He put his head back in his hands and just wept, openly. Chloe looked like she was going to be sick. I let them sit in it for a moment. This was the bottom. This was the foundation. I will restructure the loan, Mark. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic hope. Chloe gasped. But not for you, I said, my voice like ice, cutting off that hope before it could bloom. You've proven you can't be trusted. I'm doing it for Leo, my grandson. He will not grow up homeless because his father is a fool. I picked up my purse and stood. Here are my terms. You will sell the house, the glass and steel museum. You will sell the Italian kitchen and the expensive cars and every other toy you bought to impress people you don't even like. You will pay back every cent of that at a salary I set. You're not a CEO anymore, Mark. You're just an employee. My employee. And you're going to learn, from the ground up, the difference between being rich and being of value. He just stared at me, the tears still rolling down his face, the reality of his new life dawning. This wasn't a rescue. It was a sentence. Is that clear? I asked. He couldn't speak. He just nodded. A tiny, broken movement. Good, I said. My lawyers will be in touch tomorrow with the new employment contracts. Don't be late. I turned and walked out of the office, leaving them there in the glass-walled wreckage of the life they thought they had. I turned and walked out of the office, leaving them there in the glass-walled wreckage of the life they thought they had. I got in my car, my hands steady on the wheel, and I didn't look back. I drove home, to my little bungalow, and the first thing I did was go out to my garden. I put my hands in the dirt, the rich dark soil cool and real under my fingernails. That's where the real work always begins. That was 6 months ago. My son, he's learning. It's slow, painful work. He's learning that value isn't a number on a bank statement, it's the calluses on your hands. He sold the glass house. He sold the Italian kitchen and the cars that looked like spaceships. He and Chloe live in a small rental now, not far from me. Mark works for me, not as a partner, not as an executive. He's learning the books for my nursery, starting from the bottom, right next to the bags of mulch. He's learning what profit and loss actually feel like when it's your own sweat on the line. Chloe. Well, Chloe is trying. The shock might have been the best thing that ever happened to her. She's quieter. She's learning to do things for herself. Last Sunday they came over, not for a fancy dinner, just for a weekend afternoon. I was in the backyard with Leo, showing him how to plant a tomato seedling. I held his tiny hands in mine, and we pushed them into the rich, dark earth. He was giggling, actually giggling, with a smudge of dirt on his nose. And over in the corner, Mark was there. He was in old jeans and a t-shirt, sweating in the afternoon sun. He was building me a new planter box. Not imported from Italy, just simple, sturdy pine. He's good with his hands. I'd forgotten that. He's good at building things, not just buying them. We often measure success by what we have, not by what we give. But true wealth is in the roots we plant and the family we nurture. It's in the character we build, not the bank account we inflate. So let me ask you, if life handed you a brand new, unwritten page, would you have the courage to turn to it? If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the hardest of times.